صباح الخير جميعا. أنا اسمي محمد الحمدي. أنا بعمل في منظمة الأغذية والزراعة، مسؤول الأراضي والمياه في المكتب الإقليمي للشرق الأدنى وشمال أفريقيا. أنا حابب أرحب بكم جميعا إلى هذه الجلسة، جلسة مهمة، بداية الأسبوع المياه الدولي، وإن شاء الله يكون افتتاحها خيرا إن شاء الله. Let me switch to English unless there is a problem. Do we have translation? We have translation. For anyone who wants translation, please get the headset from the booth there. So I would like to welcome all of you to this session. As you can see, or you're maybe aware, we at FAO have an extensive presence at the Cairo Water Week. We have a leaflet where we indicate all the sessions that we are in, and we hope to see you in most of those sessions. This morning, this session is on building resilience within water-scarce landscapes, storing rainwater to cope with droughts and harness floods for climate-smart agriculture. جميعنا يعلم بأن قطاع الزراعة طبعا في المنطقة العربية قطاع يستخدم أكبر حصة من الموارد المائية، ومع تزايد الطلب على المياه سوف يكون القطاع الأكثر خسارة لكثير من الحصص المائية المتوفرة للزراعة. طبعا مع تداعيات تغير المناخ أيضا سيكون هذا الأمر أساسي فيما يتعلق بإعادة تحصيص المياه للاستخدامات الأخرى. وبالتالي لابد على قطاع الزراعة أن يتأقلم مع مستقبل سيكون فيه المياه أقل مما هو في الوضع الحالي، اللي هو في الأصل غير كافي. المنطقة العربية تستورد تقريبا الجزء الأكبر من غذائها من الخارج، ليس بسبب شحة الأراضي أو عدم وجود الشمس أو إلى آخره، ولكن أو مدخلات الزراعة، وإنما بسبب عدم وفرة المياه. وبالتالي المستقبل سيكون أكثر صعوبة على قطاع الزراعة فيما يتعلق بحصص المياه. أضف إلى ذلك تأثير تغير المناخ الذي سيكون أساسي وحاسم في هذا الموضوع. ونحن اليوم في هذه الجلسة نتحدث عن هذا الموضوع، نتحدث في كيفية وإمكانية التعامل مع شحة المياه، وكيفية ليس فقط إدارة الطلب مهمة جدا، ولكن كيف يمكن أن نعظم من استخدامات المياه المتوفرة من خلال ما يسمى بحصاد المياه، سواء كان على المستوى الأكبر أو على المستوى الأدنى، ما يسمى بالcommunity based small water harvesting. أنا سعيد جدا بأنه لدينا عدد من المتحدثين المهتمين بهذا الشأن من الباحثين والعاملين في قطاع المياه في المنطقة العربية. حابب أرحب بكم مرة ثانية إلى هذه الجلسة، وأتمنى أن يكون النقاش فعال يفيد النظرة للمستقبل. ماذا يمكن أن نعمل حتى نتغلب على هذه التحديات التي تواجه قطاع المياه بشكل عام وقطاع المياه الزراعية بشكل رئيسي. أعطي الكلمة للأخ الدكتور كامل عامر ليدير هذا النقاش. شكرا جزيلا.
شكرا جزيلا دكتور محمد. Thank you so much. صباح الخير جميعا. نبدأ إن شاء الله على بركة الله. إن شاء الله عندنا 4 speakers. We will start with Dr. Ziad Khayyat. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you. هنبدأ إن شاء الله مع الدكتور زياد خياط. دكتور زياد خياط is Economic Affairs Officer and the coordinator of integrated water resources management for improved water security in the Arab region at the Climate Change and Natural Resources Sustainability Cluster of the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia, ESCWA. Mr. Khayyat joined ESCWA in 2015, focusing on water-related sustainable development issues within the context of a nexus approach and on transboundary water resources opportunities and challenges in the Arab region. He has also been involved in the United Nations League of Arab States regional initiative for the assessment of climate change impacts on water resources and socio-economic vulnerability in the Arab region, RICAR, exploring climate change effects on water resources and particularly groundwater. Dr. Khayyat, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming this early in the morning to this session. And I think, thank you, Dr. Kamel, and thank you, Muhammad. Muhammad said very well the presentation, the scene for the presentation that I will be giving. It's looking at exactly what Muhammad said, the climate change impacts on water resources and what needs to be done in the future. But this is looking at, we will start a look at the regional level and then zoom into the basin level, which we are able to do. So if we, as I said, we will start with the regional level, and this is based from RICAR data. The RICAR is an initiative that looked at assessing the impacts of climate change on water resources in the Arab region, and also the socioeconomic vulnerabilities associated with that. So generally, if we're looking at what climate change is giving us for the region, there's an increase in temperature about 4 to 5 degrees in some areas of the region by the end of the century. And that's under a business as usual climate scenario, which we are unfortunately heading towards, which seems we're not improving our emissions in that sense. If we look at precipitation, again, the signals are more vulnerable, but there's a general trend of decreasing precipitation with some areas that are having more vulnerability and more intensity of rainfall within a shortened time period. What we then did from that initial RICAR, which was done at a 50-kilometer scale, is we did projections at a 10-kilometer scale in the Mashriq region. Okay? And the importance of that is it allows you to go down and do your analysis at a smaller scale at the basin level. So again, the signals from this, and this was done, again, looking at the business as usual scenario, the 8.5, RCP 8.5 scenario. And again, this is giving an increase of temperatures by 2060 now. We're talking here by 2060 of around 4 to 4.5 degrees in the Mashriq domain. And then, again, the signal for precipitation is much more variable across the region. But what's clear is we're having more intensity and more periods of flooding or periods of or dry periods, so droughts and periods, and that variation between those. So what we did is we took these regional assessments and implemented under the FAO project, the WEPS NINA, implementing the 2030 Agenda for Efficiency, Productivity, and Sustainability of Water in the NINA region. This is under the Water Scarcity Initiative implemented by FAO and funded by SIDA. We took those climate projections from the Mashriq at the 10 by 10 kilometer scale down to the basin level. And we implemented what we said is a 10-step, 10-point methodology, and this was done also with our partners at Cww. So this included consultations, stakeholder mapping, then taking the regional climate modeling, doing a watershed-specific assessment on vulnerability, looking what are the vulnerable areas, then drafting what we call a resilient package, going back to the stakeholders, and discussing these resilient packages to improve the resilience at watershed level. So This was done in 2 basins in Lebanon, and it was done also in 1 basin in Algeria. If my time permits today, I'll try to go briefly on those 3 basins and share with you some of these outcomes. So this is Nahr al-Kalb watershed in Lebanon. For those of you that are not familiar, this is a watershed that goes from sea level all the way up to an elevation of around 2,300 meters. So it has a variation of climates, microclimates within it. It has snow. Snow is very important in this watershed. And it has various sectors using the water. It has agriculture, it has industry, and it has domestic within that watershed. So when we did the vulnerability assessment compared to the reference period of 1995-2014, we saw that by 2060, the midterm, we see that of the total cropped area, 40% will be under moderate vulnerability and 54% will be under high vulnerability in the region. In terms of population, we will see that more than half of the population in the watershed will be highly impacted by climate change. If we look at crops, and one of the main crops in that basin is apples. Okay. So apples are very sensitive to the temperature. They need a low temperature in winter. And they're also sensitive to the amount of precipitation. So with our partners at ACSAD, an analysis using CropSys was done, and it was done using 2 scenarios. One was fixed CO2, and one with the projected increasing CO2. So if a fixed CO2 scenario showed that the yield of a projected yield of apples will be reduced by around 48% by mid-century. With the added CO2, elevated CO2 effect, that reduction would be around 16.4% by the midterm. Now, in terms of water, we saw that the actual evapotranspiration of apple tree is projected to increase, and that's due to first decrease in precipitation and also an increase in minimum and maximum temperature, and that the apples would need an extra 24% in water to maintain their yield. So that means that there's an extra pressure on that basin or farmers in that basin to supply that 24% for their apples. But what you don't see here is the apple production, and the quality of production will also be affected by the higher temperatures, because that's very critical for apple productions. If we move to the second slide, when we took that vulnerability assessment, there was proposals for interventions to improve the resilience in that watershed. So now we're having science inform what needs to be done to improve the resilience in that watershed. And for each watershed, there was a series of interventions proposed. For example, in this watershed, one was enhancing agriculture sector resilience, one on improving industrial water reuse, and that was looking at the quality and the reuse for the industrial sector. One was looking at livelihood diversification through sustainable tourism, because in that basin, a large portion of the population depended on the snow and the ski resorts, on tourism in that basin. And another one looked at reforestation and risk reduction of forest fires due to the increased temperatures and reduction in precipitation. So if I just quickly go through, okay. So if I quickly go through the sector, through that intervention which looked at agriculture sector resilience, these are some of the headings that we looked at within that sector. So promotion of good agriculture practices, rehabilitation of irrigation canals to reduce losses from those, use of drip irrigation, use of renewable energy for irrigation, implementation of microcatchment rainwater harvesting systems for these apple farmers to find them an extra source of water, and construction of hill reservoirs at large and medium scale. So, and this is, the duration for this would be 3 years at a cost of around 15 million, because it included these hill lakes that are costly in Lebanon. Okay, so this is another interview. How am I doing for time? So I see Dr. Kamel. How am I doing for time? Couple minutes, okay. So I'll go quickly over this one. This is another watershed in Lebanon. It's called Al-Kabir. It's the one that's shared between Lebanon and Syria, so it's a transboundary watershed, but the analysis were done on the Lebanese side. Again, looking at this watershed, we can see that by midterm, the area of high vulnerability would increase from 0.1 to around 17% of that entire watershed would be highly affected by, would be highly vulnerable to climate change. In this basin, the major crop was barley, and analysis was done on barley using aqua crop, again by our partners at ACSAD. And we saw that climate change will have only minimal impact. It will have a minimal positive impact on the barley yield, which would increase by 1% by 2070. But if you take the positive CO2 impact of CO2, that the yield might increase up to around 11%. Looking at evapotranspiration, the actual evapotranspiration actually is of barley, the seasonal. If you look at the seasonal, it's projected to increase, to decrease if you look at the entire season. But if you look at daily, you will see an increase in evapotranspiration. And the reason for that is that the growing season now, due to the increased temperatures, is becoming shorter. So the growth period is now shorter, and there's a projected decrease in the amount of evapotranspiration. So again, we looked at 5 interventions here. One looking at increasing water storage, rainwater capture. One at green infrastructure to treat the quality of wastewater, looking at nature-based solutions. One looking at mitigation measures for land degradation and drought. One is looking at fuel treatment to reduce the wildfire, which is a big issue in the Nahr al-Kabir basin. And finally, 1 minute, yes, I'll skip that. And one is at improving the knowledge of the water sector in that basin. Okay. So this is the intervention that was looking at reducing the hazards of fires in that basin due to the increase in temperature and the projected decrease in precipitation and drought, which will increase the risk of fire. And the Ministry of Environment actually adopted this intervention, and they proposed it for climate financing in a conference that we had last month in Beirut. I won't go, this is another basin that we did in Al Jarwa. Also there, the vulnerability would increase to 94% by mid-century, but I won't go into details into that. Again, there we looked at the analysis of the citrus. Their decline in production was, in yield was projected to be around 51% by midterm, with an increased demand of around 13% in water. So there's again, the increased demand on water. And then there was 5 interventions proposed for that basin in Al Jarwa. And this is some details, I won't go into it, okay? So again, the takeaway message here, that it's very important to understand the relationship between climate change and not just water, the energy, the food nexus is essential to look at the changes and how are the different sectors that are intersecting are impacted, and in order to develop informed and integrated strategies that take into considerations these climate change projections and their effect on the various sectors, the water, the agriculture sector. And what we found that one of the most important things is to enhance the adaptive capacity measures. They would have the greatest potential in reducing the vulnerabilities in any of these basins in the midterm and in the near term and midterm periods. And I guess I'm out of time. I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zia. Very clear interventions and very clear taken messages. Now we are moving to the second speaker. Our second speaker is Ms. Jacqueline Pinat, Program Officer, FAO Regional Office for the Near East and North Africa. Jacqueline is a Program Officer for the FAO Regional Office for the Near East and North Africa, providing operations and technical support to FAO's regional and country level programs, with particular focus on resilience, disaster risk reduction, and the humanitarian response. Jacqueline, the floor is yours. You have 15 minutes, Jacqueline. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Morning, everyone. Again, my name is Jacqueline Pinat. I particularly work with FAO's regional initiative on building resilience. I prepared this presentation with my colleague, Teresa Wong, who is our Natural Resources Officer, and for any discussions later, we'll try to both respond and contribute. All right, I'll start with some numbers to draw everybody's attention and you know, to wake us all up. What we're facing now is really an alarming rate of global hunger. We have been on a steady increase, unfortunately, and in fact, in the last 2 years, we have seen a spike in food insecurity and hunger. By 2021, we were at 2.3 billion hungry and malnourished in, around the world. 828 million were affected by hunger, but also up by 46 million from just the year before. Now, 222 million out of that 828 million will face acute food insecurity, which means crisis to famine levels, so varying degrees of extreme hunger. And this rise in number is actually largely driven by conflict, economic shocks, as we have seen in the last couple of years as well, and climate extremes. Now here in the region, let's bring that back and contextualize that to the region. We have 69 million people in the region who suffered from hunger in 2021. If you take that number out of the bigger global total, and out of that we have 141 million are moderate or severely food insecure. So this is the total of those who have had difficulty in accessing healthy diets or adequate food, in addition to those that have actually gone hungry. 3 of the top 10 countries with the worst food crisis, in crisis or worse in famine conditions, are in the NINA region. And this has been a steady presence, according to the IPC, the phase classification. Now, if nothing changes, more than 75 million people will suffer from hunger by 2030 here in the region if the trends continue. And it can get worse, as we have already been seeing. All right, so that picture of food insecurity and that reality of food insecurity here in the region, FAO's done a study on the nationally determined contributions of countries to the Paris Agreement. And what we've found is that 94% of the countries report climate-related impacts to agroecosystems. This is particularly around rain-fed, irrigated lands and agropastoral communities. And 81% of them report food insecurity and malnutrition as climate-related risks. Now, all of that is in the background. At the bottom of that is actually Nina's water scarce condition. It's water scarce and it's arable land scarce. I think Dr. Kayat's already done some introduction on that. And then we'll hear more from our speakers this morning. So what does that mean to us here in the region? So overall, actually disasters affect agriculture largely. In fact, this number is up to 26% out of this year, that agriculture absorbs 26% of the impact of disasters, medium to large scale disasters across the world. Now that means a loss of livelihoods and assets for 38% of our own population. Now, this is another study that FAO has done of countries here in the NINA. We did a survey of their NDMOs and what they thought were the major hazards to agriculture and food security as they were experiencing in countries. And we zero here we zero in on drought here as being the biggest concern for the countries in the region. This is just, I won't go into detail because the text is too small, but this is practically just showing how disasters and the structural vulnerabilities here in the region negatively affect food security. And food security meaning all the agents of food security. We're not just talking about access, we're talking about people's agency, the capacity to sustain livelihoods, and all the other, and food availability and stability. So all of that combined is affected when all these hazards and all these hazards go into and push on the structural vulnerability of our agriculture societies. Now, how does FAO define resilience? So it's practically the ability to prevent disasters and crises, as well as to anticipate, absorb, and accommodate or recover from them in a timely and efficient and sustainable manner. What we're looking for here is different capacities and resources to anticipate, prevent, absorb, adapt, and eventually transform. I think I was missing one slide. Sorry, I skipped that. And I'll just go back to that for a minute here because this actually brings to fore the key hazards here in the region. So one is floods, now the transboundary diseases in plants and animals. So that's including desert locust, fall armyworm. We have a number of diseases in animals, including Rift Valley fever, avian influenza, brucellosis, and the like. And then, of course, drought. Here in the region, again, as I mentioned, that's the biggest issue. So why did I go back to that? And why did I highlight resilience? So here, what I want to talk about and also share with you is a couple of experiences from the countries, farming communities in particular. A couple of years ago, FAO piloted a number of community-based on-farm DRR activities, and two of them were related to drought conditions. And these were also in conflict-affected communities. So we had pilots in Syria, Yemen, and Iraq. And I wanted to show you some of the experience from the field in response to drought. We started with community-based DRR awareness. So this was through a series of agriculture-based hazards and vulnerability capacity assessments and discussions at the community level. And these are the key things that came out from the community, really focusing around their concern about drought, the severity of the drought incidents that have been happening and that they've been noticing. So one, there's decreased potable water for human and animal consumption. The crop losses could be up to 60 to 75% gap, especially in wheat and barley. And then the absence of early warning for any disaster, and particularly in drought. So they don't, while they know and while they experience drought on a regular basis, we don't know how long it's going to be and how severe it's going to be at the community level. And then there's willingness of the 50% of the community start to look for labor elsewhere, outside of the agriculture, their own agriculture livelihoods. And that could be in conflict-affected settings or post-conflict-affected settings. That could go back to joining armed groups as a form of livelihood. And that's something that we need to consider, especially since the three countries that are most food insecure here in the region are conflict-affected countries. So another one,
5 minutes.
thank you, sir. Another one is the 65% fodder price hike. And this is something that we notice and we feel, and we felt so much in the last couple of years with the increase in prices of food and commodities and agriculture inputs. So there's this one pilot that we did in Syria, which addresses on-farm level concerns about fodder availability during drought and dry spells, and that is the spineless cactus cultivation. So we found out that we can do this during drought spells, and this is an alternative to fodder and to for them to move around too much and take their animals to much further places. So another one is the hydroponic feed production, when this is barley. And we found that with a kilogram of barley, if you grow it in a hydroponic system, it yields about 6 kilograms in 10 days. So they thought they would start with poultry, but then they ended up also using it to feed other livestock. So these are two experiences, including the discussions that we've had in the field. And what can we learn from here? And I'm trying to put together a set of recommendations that are on-farm and also much broader for us. So really for us, piloting and simulation and modeling actually helps, because we've found that farmers, the experience and seeing it firsthand speaks to the farmers. Investing in evidence-based early warning systems and anticipatory action is important. One, in fact, FAO has found that investing $1 in evidence-based anticipatory action yields about $7 in terms of savings for response much later. In terms of piloting and community-based, farm-based DRR activities, they're about 2.2% better in terms of yield and in terms of results. So those are two key things that we need to take away from the rest of the recommendations here, which would include adaptation planning, climate change adaptation, and mainstreaming DRR in climate change in climate change adaptation in agriculture policies and plans. And I'll stop there so that we've got another couple of minutes for questions or further input. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Thank you. For the sake of time, I'll move to this third. So I spoke with Ziad, and everything's fine. He will be here. So we can postpone the questions to the end. I'll move to the third speaker now. Our third speaker is Ajit Govind. He is a broadly trained environmental physicist interested in studying various biophysical interactions on the Earth's surface. Currently, he is working as a CARDAS climatologist based in Egypt. He is also a senior scientist at the French National Institute of Agricultural Research, INRA. He was born and raised in Kerala, India. His academic training consists of a bachelor's degree in agriculture science, TNAU, India, 1998, master's degree in agricultural physics, IRI, India, 2001, and doctoral degree in eco-hydrological biogeochemical modeling, University of Toronto, Canada, 2008. Ajit, the floor is yours. You have 20 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kamal. Good morning, all of you. This is a presentation by two people, myself and my colleague, Dr. Meera. So we will try to put together a presentation highlighting the issue of rainwater harvesting, which is so far a climate smart intervention that has not been greatly emphasized in various national climate adaptation strategies. So, okay. So first of all, at the outset, I would like to acknowledge the support of FAO under the WEP's NINA to 2030 project, which is funded by the CEDA. This has been, I mean, the issue of regional water scarcity has been a critical issue that has been supported by FAO in the region through various ways, like the evapotranspiration network and also the rainwater harvesting issue. So I would like to draw your attention by showcasing some of the climate analytics that we have been doing using the RICAR datasets. RICAR, as Dr. Said has mentioned, it is a regionally downscale climate product, which is specific to the NINA region or MENA region. And we can do a lot of analytics based on the RICAR datasets. And what we have found that the region as a whole is extremely vulnerable to climate change. And of course, the temperature is changing as we intuitively imagine, and it is increasing. But precipitation is very speculative, where and how precipitation is changing. We can confidently say that only the Maghreb region is showing declining precipitation trend in the MENA region. And it is statistically confident that this is a region that is highly vulnerable to climate change. But there are also other places in the MENA region where the precipitation is declining. Water, as the theme of this Cairo Water Week, water is the center of climate action in the MENA region. So the issue of using water as a climate adaptation strategy is the focus here. And my presentation will be focused on how to conserve the natural hydrological, water that is obtained from the precipitation evaporation cycle, which we call as rainwater harvesting. We are not talking about the groundwater here. So water harvesting is a method of water conservation. It's in arid and semi-arid regions where rainfall is either not sufficient to sustain good crop production, or where, due to the erratic nature of precipitation, there is a risk of crop failure. So this is not a simple issue. It has to, we have to consider multidisciplinary approach, like we have to consider the topography of the landscape, we have to consider the type of vegetation, we have to consider the soil conditions, and also many other characteristics are involved while we design rainwater harvesting, bespoke rainwater harvesting strategies in different contexts. So we have to understand that this we cannot assume that just by constructing a rain or runoff protecting devices or runoff reducing devices like micro water harvesting structures, we will be able to do rainwater harvesting efficiently. So water balance approach is extremely essential. Water harvesting simply means a clear understanding of how the hydrological cycle is happening. So at the scale of MENA, what we would like to know is to have a simple approach of water balance. That is the first equation. Input minus output is storage change. But this simple equation can be made very complex as we go more and more down the scale, that is at the very, very local scale. There could be many, many hydrological processes involved. So what we were trying to do is to put together a platform where we could understand regionally which are the locations of water harvesting potential, and to provide zonation of water harvesting potential, so that it could aid in stakeholders who are involved in policy making for bespoke water harvesting policies, developing bespoke water harvesting policies so as a climate action. So in this particular platform, we have several modules which has a detailed analysis of hydroclimatology, because meteorology and hydroclimatology plays a great role in how precipitation is changing, and it gives users the possibility to analyze that and to graph it and all those things. And also to visualize various biophysical products such as soil, organic carbon, terrain, all those things. So there's a second module. Then there is a module dedicated to water balance. It's water balance is to know, users can understand what is the mechanism of water cycling happening in different places. Then we have a module dedicated to rainwater harvesting zonation. Then from the WCAT database, which is a database of sustainable land management, we have put together a comprehensive database of various sustainable land management practices that are being documented for the MENA region. So this is a snapshot of our the platform that we have developed. You are welcome to go and explore it. The simply showing it is a platform that harvests data which is available in cloud platforms, which like Google Earth Engine, where we could make use of the diversity of the data sets and then make very sophisticated analytics. And users, the non-expert users can easily analyze those complex hydrological mechanisms through this website. That is the idea. So this is again a screenshot of the second module called biophysical products. So this is an example for Iraq, where we have taken a place in the Kurdistan region and we have analyzed the water balance. So this is one module of that website. So finally, we make a multi-criteria based water harvesting potential zonation. So it's a very complex calculation involving different parameters and different types of relationships and criteria. And finally, we come up with zonation of water harvesting potential in the region, so that this could aid in policy making and suggest. It could also help in planners to decide where to invest and where not to invest. So I would like to conclude by saying that all climate adaptation in MENA should have a water as a fulcrum, which is again the theme of this conference. Rainwater harvesting as a climate adaptation is still a nascent stage and needs attention. It's quite relevant to the MENA region. Identifying context-specific rainwater harvesting interventions need integrated analysis of landscape or watershed scheme with a systems approach. So we cannot assume that places where there are complex topography, just by constructing micro irrigation or micro harvesting structure, we will be able to efficiently harvest water. But there should be a in-depth analysis to it. We have constructed a platform which could aid in the policymakers to decide where to invest. One immediate impact we had was we were able to influence the World Bank for investing in rainwater harvesting in Iraq. We were also part of the climate smart agriculture investment blueprint preparation for Iraq. And in that, we have recommended through this project that we have recommended that rainwater harvesting is indeed an influential climate adaptation strategy in Kurdistan region. So rainwater harvesting can be manifested by a combination of reduction of evapotranspiration or reduction of runoff, or by enhancing the soil water storage. But which is the balance, that is research in itself. So I just want to conclude and give the floor to my colleague who will speak on very, very country-specific activities, but by showing this thought-provoking cartoon where I just try to say that we have to balance the three big giants, that is the evapotranspiration, runoff, and the storage change. And it has to be balanced in such a way that we have to think about upstream and downstream when we talk about river systems. Because we cannot simply reduce runoff at upstream because it will affect downstream also. So we have to engage stakeholders and many players. So it is a balance of, it's optimization, it's not perfection. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ajit. So now, Mira. Ms. Mira Haddad draws on 17 years of experience as an environmental and geographical management working environmental information system, GIS specialist. She is a research associate, special analyst, and database work supports the research on the enhancement of ecosystem services and approaching land degradation neutrality in dry lands. Her research is primarily focusing on marginal dryland agro-pastoral community and watershed development in the Central and West Asia region. She is currently a PhD student at the Faculty of Geoscience at Utrecht University and holds an MSc in Environmental Science and Management from Jordan University. Mira, the floor is yours. I would really appreciate it if you can squeeze yourself in 8 minutes.
Thank you so much.
So.
But
Thank you.
till the slides is ready, I just want to come to an example, not from the satellite suitability mapping with Ajit and record data with ESQA. I wanted to present some examples that we implemented within this project in countries where water either is scarce or it is not easy to access. So in Jordan, we have implemented a small-scale water harvesting structures. And when we say water harvesting, that means that we combine in situ water harvesting with the vegetation cover. This means that we try to restore degraded ecosystem with vegetation cover and trying to use the available resources on the ground. So within this project funded by CEDA, we have 2 projects, one in Jordan, planning and piloting watershed rehabilitation for improved water productivity with water harvesting in Jordan. And in Palestine, we tried to testing and autoscaling in situ water approach in Palestine. In Palestine, we tried to accommodate the need and the urgency of having water harvesting in the country with the olive tree plantation. In Jordan, just to present that we build on the FAO project of defining water harvesting structures. We try to include the biophysical and socio-economic evaluation, including emerging the local community consultation and meeting. We used GIS data to identify suitable sites, but also we have in-depth meetings and consultation with local community to agree where we can implement the idea of rehabilitation of degraded ecosystem. We have a lot of focus group discussion meetings with local community. We develop a methodology how to identify hotspot mapping in a watershed scale. And in that hotspot mapping, we run a model that can identify a place we can implement the in situ water harvesting. And this picture shows how local community were trained and developed on the concept of rehabilitation of degraded areas using in situ water harvesting and planting of native plant species. This is the concept of our site. These photos were taken 2 weeks ago. So the concept is to have small pits along the hill slope that will capture the rainfall runoff, give opportunity for the plant to grow and opportunity for water to infiltrate. Then we will have a healthier landscape. In that case, we're coping with the climate change, providing local community with needed livestock fodder, stabilize soil erosion, and trying not to damage the downstream impact. The community involvement is a unique, let's say, part of this project because we have implemented the project with the local community. They were involved from the site design, implementation, even monitoring, and we have the involvement of FAO, CEDA visit at the site. Using the hotspot erosion map presented quickly before, I just want to say that we can use models using in-depth field measurements to decide where we can restore these degraded areas, where we can increase soil moisture content and increase the biomass production. And from there, we can measure the impact on the soil losses and erosion and the runoff rates to the downstream areas. We have also supported the local community with several trainings. One of it is the dairy production unit, small and advanced training that we have developed with the local community. We have also produced dryer units that it is completely automatic, saving time and provide equality and reduce losses. This is just to list the number of trainings that we have within this small period of project, but I have to say that around 41% of the participants were female in this community. We have also developed a community perception of implementing such rehabilitation project, and like a conclusion for this perception is that community restoration objective can increase awareness of the restoration benefit of ecosystem services. Moving quickly to Palestine, the aim was to support the existing olive farm agriculture with establishing of micro water harvesting. So with a lot of teams involved, we tried to increase the capacity development, even remotely. We couldn't, even from Jordan, we couldn't visit Palestine. It's a pity, but thanks to the teams of FAO on the ground and other teams, we had trained the local experts and increase their capacity on the in-situ water harvesting, monitoring, and implementation. We have also implemented the 3 rainwater harvesting on existing olive farms, and with the support of soil moisture monitoring that we installed and trained local community on that. This is just to give you the overview of the sites. For sure, all these were implemented based on calculation related to biophysical indicators like soil depth, slope, tree, let's say, height and width. So this is Faqou'a, Tamoun, Tayassir sites. And we're aiming to do 2 things, actually, to define olive land suitability, combined with the expansion of olive land areas in Palestine on rainfall zone that can be used with water harvesting. We have developed a policy brief. In that policy brief, that we can improve the productivity and let's say the benefit on livelihood using the in-situ water harvesting with olive tree plantation. I'm sorry for the presentation that went quickly, but this is also another in-situ water harvesting that shows this is the same site. It's treated with the in-situ water harvesting and the planting of native species, just to show you how potentially we can use the resources at its place. Sorry.
Thank you so much. Perfect timing. Thank you. Now we are moving to the questions and answers. So we'll open the floor for 10 minutes from now for questions and answers. So. Please, go ahead. Thank you. Mike, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For water harvesting is the most appropriate processes in order as climate change resilience. At the same time, it is also work with water scarcity. However, we always have with the water harvesting, we have sedimentation process. And this process, it is decrease the capacity of the infrastructure used for the water harvesting. And we have some problems with the computation of the amount of this sedimentation coming with the rainwater. So I want to hear from our colleague from India if they have some experience how to deal with this problem in terms of the computation and also in terms of the maintenance of this problem in order to keep the capacity of the different infrastructure used for water harvesting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Karima. Our colleague Ajit is working in Ikarda. He's in Ikarda. Dr. Ajit, do you want to respond to that?
Thank you for this question. Yes, now we have to understand that water harvesting can be done in many ways. Like what you may be talking about is the open tanks and mini dams, things of that sort. This is the issue of siltation can be there, but this is fundamentally because of the soil erosion. It is not, rain will not have silt on its sediment on its own. It is the rain when it is interacting with the land surface, it is bringing the sediment along with it and then eventually filling the structures with silt. So I think what the best could be done is to reduce the erosion situation when the water is flowing through the landscape. We have to also ensure that the erosion is reduced dramatically. In most of the dry lands, we have the issue of what is called a soil crusting. And because of prolonged dryness and intensive rainfall, in long term, we have a soil crust is developed. So this can be reduced by more and more proliferation of vegetation or some sort of disturbance of the ground by some chisel plow or something like that, so that we can allow infiltration to happen when the water is flowing through the landscape. And so water will be infiltrated in the ground, but also whatever is remaining comes and collects into the water retention structures like pond or something like that. So just by my message would be, just by constructing mini dams or tanks would not suffice, but also we have to do some sustainable land management around that, like reducing the infiltration. So it has to be as a package of practice. Like water harvesting should be done with construction of dams and tanks, etc. And also at the landscape scale, we should try to reduce soil erosion and issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ajit. Thank you. The floor is open for any other questions, please. We will take like number of questions and then we will collect the answer together for the sake of time. Please go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you, speakers, for the insightful presentations. I'm engineer Buran Awad from Sudan. I work as a water resources engineer in Newtech Consulting Group, and I am also an early warning system expert in the International Center for Environmental Monitoring. My question is that recently we have realized, in Sudan I mean, we have realized that the situation in Sudan is a little bit complex because we are dealing with the climate variability more than the climate change, because as you know that we have a very poor infrastructure, and also we don't have a robust early warning system in place. So my question is that can any one of the speakers tell us or give me an advice if these approaches or techniques can be downscaled to combat the climate variability? Because if we try to apply the climate change mitigation measures in our agropastorals and agro-pastoral communities, it will be like we are putting a small object in a bigger box. So these communities will be more loose to these measures, and also it may become more vulnerable. So my question is that can we downscale those climate change techniques and approaches to combat the climate variability, not the climate change? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other questions? Teresa, please.
Thank you. I'm Teresa Wong from the FAO Regional Office here in Cairo. This question is for Ziad and Esqua. Could you give us a little sense of the methodology that went into the design of the climate resilience packages? Did those, each 5 packages come up from stakeholder consultations, data, literature review? So just a bit about that. Thanks.
Thank you.
If there is no one else, I can
Any
speak.
further question? Please, Dr. Muhammad, go ahead.
Also, Ziad, Ziad, I have this question before, and I really need help in that one. In that example of barley in Jordan, by 2060, the yield will increase 11%. This is a little bit need to be explained because it's a little bit goes against the norm of what we are really expecting. So if you can help us on that, will be good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Muhammad. A last one, please. Any other question? Heba, go ahead, please.
Good morning. Heba Al-Hariri, Water Advisor from the Regional Office of the NIN region at FAO. My question is for Teresa, actually. We know, Teresa, that there is a big challenge in translating the climate information into real DRR planning or plans in general, particularly for the climate projections. We look at lots of models and we can actually look at the anomalies on these models, but how would that reflect on the DRR and on extreme events is a really challenging question, particularly for the agriculture sector, as you showed in your presentations. What are the current measures that you are taking in order to try to evaluate disaster risk reduction on the agriculture sector and maybe come up with some more information on the loss and damage in the agriculture sector and how it's impacted by the climate change? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Heba. I think you meant Jacqueline. You meant Jacqueline. Thank you. So now we have four questions, 2 for Ziad, 1 for Jacqueline, and 1 for any of our speakers who can respond to it, from Dr. Awad, from Engineer Awad from Sudan. Okay. Who would you like to start? So, Ziad, please.
Okay, it's working. So thank you for these questions and for coming in. Okay, so maybe I'll start with the 10-point methodology adopted in this project. So basically, this was a combination of looking at the regional modeling, then focusing on the watershed, and then combining that with stakeholder consultation at the watershed level. So there were about 4 stages of stakeholder consultations. The first was on understanding who are the stakeholders, what are the major players, what are the sectors to consider the vulnerability in that watershed. Then again, looking at what are the climate change projections, then going back to the stakeholders and understanding what they consider as indicators of vulnerability, what's important for their vulnerability in this watershed. Once we got these indicators from them and discussion, then we constructed vulnerability maps. So we saw which areas would be mostly impacted according to the stakeholders in this watershed. Based on these vulnerability maps, we went back to the stakeholders. Again, the local stakeholders, we had a discussion of what interventions they saw that would help them improve their resilience in this watershed. And that's why you see that the packages vary a lot. They address agriculture, they address tourism, for example, in Nahr al-Kalb, because snow is important and skiing is important. So we had a list from these stakeholder recommendations of about 10, 15 interventions. But then we had to really match that, what of these interventions makes sense in terms of what we saw in climate change vulnerability. Because sometimes when you go to local stakeholders, there isn't that clear break between what is climate change and what is just what their daily needs, and especially with the economic hardship in Lebanon, that was tough. Based on that consultation, then we filtered down to about 5 to 4 interventions in each watershed. We went back to the stakeholders and the national stakeholders to see that what we filtered made sense and what needed adjustments, and we did a final adjustment. And that was really reflected in the way that the stakeholders adopted it, and as I mentioned, even at the national scale, the governments uptook these into their climate adaptation plans in that sense. The other question on the barley, I have to admit that this is a team that was done between ESCWA, FAO, and ACSAD. So I'm not the perfect technical person, but it depends on what crop you're looking at and you're analyzing. Some crops benefit from the increase in temperature, and if you look at the barley case, there was a great benefit from the projected increase in CO2. So there was that increase in production due to the increase in CO2. You see that great jump. Without the CO2, the production, statistically, it's only increased like 1%, so it wasn't really as significant. But once you introduce the CO2, the barley increased, the yield of barley increased a lot over a shorter season. So it depends on how crops benefit from the CO2 concentration. This is what experts explain to me. I'm not a crop expert, so this is what colleagues at ACSAD have explained to me in their analysis. And that's why they do a fixed CO2 and an increased CO2 production. It depends also on the crops. Some of them are not affected by the CO2, and you don't see that. You actually see a drop in production. I'll give the floor to others.
Thank you so much, Ziad. Jacqueline, would you like to respond to Hiba's question?
Okay. Well, thank you, Heba. Okay, so I feel like there are 2 elements to your question. One is how to put out the information, climate information, and particularly to the farmers. The challenge there is not just simplifying the information. I mean, even I cannot claim to understand and be very well versed with the responses, with the technical information. The challenge there is simplifying, and not only just simplifying, but also making the information accessible. So there, you know, the challenge here is early warning, accessible early warning information that will inform anticipatory action, whether that's at the local level or at the community level or at the national level. Unfortunately, here in the region, we only have about 7 countries that have some form of early warning system, and many of them, all of them, are not to the level that we would like them to be. So that's kind of my response there. The other one is on damage and loss and what FAO is doing. FAO has developed its methodology for calculating damage and loss to agriculture from the various hazards and from climate change. What we've done so far is put out the flagship publication, which is an annual public or biannual publication that highlights the impact of disasters in climate on agriculture. But in addition to that, we're also training and building capacity of the Ministries of Agriculture for the damage and loss methodology, which we're doing. So
Thank you so
we'll
much.
talk.
Thank you so much, Lee. Thank you. We have now one question for any of the speakers who want to respond to it. The question by Engineer Awad from Sudan. Please, go ahead, please, Mira.
Okay, thank you for your question. I have to say that suitability mapping usually give you indications that this area could be suitable, but to implement something on the ground and to work on the ground, you need to visit and clarify, does the satellite data sets, the biophysical, for example, soil texture or soil depth or rock content, give you the exact information as it is on the ground. And I think we need to think on a watershed level, like what is the upstream, downstream water source allocation. And this is what we tried to do in the Jordan part of this project, is to understand how best we can connect the rangeland, the water source that goes directly to the downstream areas, the irrigated areas. And I think with local community, you can build something and you can sustain it. And it is a context based, like you need to work on the ground. Suitability mapping is a good indicative for what possible could be implemented as good practices or sustainable land management. But again, with local community, upstream, downstream water source allocation, using again satellite data to understand what will be the variability of climate change in the future.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry, we are running out of time, so I would prefer to just finish with the engineer.
We also support and agree, validate what Zaid has shown about the barley increase in yield. ICARD has been always promoting barley as a wonder crop, a climate resilient crop, and we have seen through our models also barley has prospects of.
Thank you so much, Ajit. Thank you. Now we are moving to the last speaker, Ms. Domitiva Lee. Domitiva Lee works as a project manager for the FAO Regional Office for Near East and North Africa, FAO-RNE. She coordinates a regional project funded by the Swedish Cooperation on implementing the Agenda of 2030 for efficiency, productivity, and sustainability in the NENA region. She is an agricultural specialist with a specialization in environmental assessment, rural engineering, and water resources management. With 25 years of experience, she works in different regions of the world on environmental performance, information sharing, irrigation, and water assessment. For the last 15 years, her work focuses on particularly land and water management for agriculture. The floor is yours, Domiti.
Thank you very much. So this last presentation is a little bit to resume some of the elements that were highlighted by the previous presentation. Just we look at climate change, the impact of climate change and intervention. We look at early warning and again interventions, and we just look at rainwater harvesting as a characteristic intervention. What does it mean when we look at water and we just put it at scale? And that's what I wanted to show you. So it's important when we think of you know, all this coping strategy for water scarcity or for climate change. And for example, if we just think one intervention could be try to store as much as possible the water in the different layers we have in the soil, in the above ground, underground, you know, making sure that people have a capacity to access water in the time of drought and dry spells. So clearly, it's also an opportunity for extreme events like floods. If you can store the water, you could reuse it, and you will reduce the risk on, you know, destruction of infrastructure, etc. So there is so many opportunities there. But what is the impact it will have on flows if we think that we have people that live in different parts of our watershed, upstream and downstream, and they may have had before activities using that water that will come to them. I just use a nice, I think, scheme of Frank van Steenbergen of Meta that just shows that you have, you know, the idea that we should think in terms of 3 areas. So reuse, recycling, and store. So let me continue with the, and then you just see that, as was highlighted by Ajit earlier, you have a lot of intervention. You have the WOCAT that just have gathered, a number of them. In the region, you have a lot more that haven't been documented yet. So you do have here a pool of knowledge. But what would happen if we bring it at scale? So you have the opportunities. That's, again, I borrowed a slide from Frank that shows that if you were to store the water that just goes aside the roads, you can see that you can increase storage. So just water stored for other uses. You can also increase infiltration. So there is a big potential here that we could tap into, and that is not sufficiently used because you don't have drainage system on most of the road. And if you go in Cairo in a time of heavy rain, it's very rare, but there you see, I mean, all the cars stops and we get flooded with the limited water that is there. So clearly we don't have any strategy to recover that water on roads. So you have effects. You can regreen, as was shown by Mira. We can even act on the local climate, improve soil fertility, groundwater recharge, as I say. You could also have local water availability. But the question again is, how long will we have these resources? And what would be the effect on water use? So that's where we just recommend that you take a step back and you just look at what is the situation in terms of resources and demands. You can use water counting as an approach that helps to understand the fate of water and inform strategic decisions. What does it do? We just look at what is the water available, I mean, theoretically available, let's say, that we, in theory, we could access to. It looks at what are the demands, and then it looks at how these demands are evolving, so it's today and tomorrow. So if we do rainwater harvesting, there is a tomorrow that we have to think about. There will be a new demand linked to these resources. So what you need your water balance, of course, but you need to understand also what are the strategies and policy around. So combined with some auditing, or governance analysis of the situation. So the water accounting will just be a critical tool to learn about this. So I just wanted to make a concrete example so that you see where I'm heading at. So let's take an example in India. I mean, you have many regions in the world where you had very intensive watershed development programs. So that's a little bit what Ajit said. You have to combine multiple options so that you just manage water better at scale. So it's not enough to do rainwater harvesting. You need to just also do vegetation management. So you have all this combination, and that's called watershed management. So this example in India, so they had this intensive activity. So this example in southern India, you see the little picture where all the rivers is completely covered with little structures. So the structures will, at any stage, drainage is stopped. And so just to enable either groundwater recharge or, creating 5 minutes, okay. And so creating structures, storage. Here you see, I won't go into detail, but you see that the wells between 90 and 2002, you see that you had a change, dramatic change in the number of wells, for example. in the number of the irrigation areas, the number of farmers, irrigation farmers, the number of structures. So you see that here everything has been multiplied. So what does it mean when we look at water accounting? It means that if we look at we cut a little bit our watershed and we look at all the structures and we think of our reservoir that was downstream, this reservoir that was initially storing the water coming down, running down the slope, then now you can see that the average retained reservoir inflow has been reduced by 64%. You see that the frequency of the reservoir spills have been also reduced by 66%. The average annual duration of having a reservoir filled above 10% of its capacity also less than 69%. That's why if you look at the watershed and if you develop really efficiently doing rainwater harvesting from upstream down, I mean, if you had a reservoir downstream, it means that his utility is dramatically reduced. So, and if we compare with other cases in India, for example, taking a number of these small reservoirs that were downstream of a small watershed, you see exactly the same phenomenon as soon as you have developed the watershed. So what is important to remember there is just you cannot plan climate smart intervention, rainwater harvesting or any intervention without thinking of, at the beginning, having a baseline and monitoring what is happening and the effect of your intervention, and then to be able to stop if you go too far and over-allocate your resources. So if we have to conclude of what happened with these small dams, the consumptive water use, so the evapotranspiration, has increased overall the watershed because you had more people accessing water thanks to these ponds and additional resources created. You had more equitable access because upstream people were able to develop irrigation, so that's a positive thing. But you had groundwater use that increased for the downstream people that had no more water in their reservoir, and you had inflow to the reservoir into the downstream users like, landless people, livestock herders, or fishermen, fisherfolk that lost access to these resources. So maybe just to conclude, I think I have very few minutes. We need to build robust system, and this robust system means that you just start small. You are just not too ambitious, and first you do a rapid assessment of what is happening with the existing data. Can I do my water balance? Do I have enough data and evidence to just inform policymakers or not? And then I go to a new cycle and a new cycle, 1 minute. And then we can use, for example, the ET network that is managed by ICARDA, that enabled to just develop evidence on water consumption. And I will conclude with this last slide, just saying that we are working on developing a protocol on water accounting that aims to propose building blocks, because every country is so different. You cannot just come with a blueprint, but you can just say there are a number of building blocks you have to just use if you want to institutionalize and execute water accounting in your country. And then you can decide on what water management issues are important. So as a concluding remark, so when you work at watershed landscape level, you do need to consider the fate of water, and you can use this approach. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Domiti. Now to Mr. Chairman, Dr. Mohammed Al-Hamdi, for the conclusion, for the wrapping up and the conclusion remarks. Thank you. Dr. Mohammed.
Thank you, Dr. Kamel, and thank you for the good moderation, especially with timing. You see, we're perfect on time. We'll have the break on time. So this is maybe the first time I've seen this. Thank you to all the speakers. I hope we've been able to give you a snapshot of what we do in partnership with ICARDA and with ESCWA. In terms of increasing resilience to water scarcity and climate change impacts. This is an important topic. And just to elaborate on what Dr. Karima has indicated with regard to the how do we manage rainwater harvesting as an important technical approach for increasing supplies. This region is not a stranger to water harvesting. I come from Yemen, and in Yemen, if it wasn't for rainwater harvesting, people would not live. In the top of the mountains, you have water harvesting structures for hundreds of years. And to manage those, and that's the answer to Dr. Karim's question, it is the community coming together. In some of the villages up in the mountains with a pond, they come before the rainy season together and clean. As a community, they clean the siltation and they clean the watershed, the areas where water flows, so that they enhance the water quality, so it's a water quality protection, and also removing all the siltation. I'm sure there are other technical elements with land cover vegetation, enhancing recharge. There are a lot of issues, but it is the community, it's the ownership process of the community and their perception on their livelihoods. Here I also would like to give an example. We witnessed one of the drought years back home in the 1920 in the early 2000s. One region where water harvesting was a tradition, they overcame the drought. They were able to continue their livelihoods, etc. And another area where that was not a tradition, they had to move from that area. Basically, they had to move to another area. So you see, it is the adaptation and increasing resilience. And I think what was presented here maybe is also giving us, all of us, ideas on how to improve this. But to me, communities have to be at the heart of this. It is community participation in all aspects of the water management cycle. I'm not going to repeat what my colleagues have presented, but I hope you have gotten the message. I hope this triggers more question and answer during the breaks with the speakers, etc. And I'm also hopeful that you continue with us. We have a whole day program of FAO today. So if you remain in this room, you will be able to see the next session and the one after. So we have a full day of program here, and we hope to see you with us. Thank you very much for coming, and have a good break.